Welcome to Workshop Wednesday. Today we're going to have some fun. We're going to look at taking different templates, using them for different curves, different shapes, creating an abstract design in a radial pattern. So join us and have some fun with some wonderful colors, techniques. We're going to reflect the color wheel in there, make sure we understand monochromatic, how do we create value with texture, maybe some stippling, some thick lines, thin lines, and just express ourselves and have fun.
And to give you an idea, and you'll notice the different shapes in here and how this one's filled all the way in with color and value. And then you'll see how some of these others have negative space in the background that is white, which helps break up that design and add emphasis. And what they've done is they've come in and added some line work, so it wasn't just a plain white space. Whereas this one is a lot fuller, and they left some of the white space to break up those bright colors. So we're going to walk through this. The other thing you'll notice on the criteria, I'm going to just point out real quick here, is see the gradation and the change in these values. So those are like monochromatic color values. Here's one here as well. This one is right here, or even here. There's a couple of them. And then over here, it kind of does the same thing, only with yellows and greens. The other thing you'll notice is you'll see the color wheel. It's hidden in each one of these designs. So this one, the color wheel is these small circles right here. This one has small circles to large circles across here. This one you'll see goes around on the outside like a clock. And if you look really close, you'll see this one has these really small circles. But you'll see when it gets over here, it kind of gets lost. So you can zoom in on the slide on your Chromebook and you'll see those a little bit closer. So here is a whole pile of examples. So it was kind of fun to see all of them together, and I'm hoping some of that gives you some ideas of what to do. But I want to point out the criteria. The criteria is you do have to have the color wheel in there somewhere. And you'll notice right here, this shape right here is the color wheel. Okay? You also need values of color in a gradation. The blues are a gradation. The red oranges to orange is a gradation. Monochromatic color scheme, that means various shades of one color, which would also be in here. So technically, this one right here would be a gradation because it goes from light to dark. But then you do have a gradation of that color value, which is actually monochromatic. So it kind of has both right there. Over here, let's point out some things not to do. And you'll see why the designs look weaker. Okay? This right here, although that is very well done and very nice, when you actually put images in there, it's distracting. So it's no longer really the abstraction that we're looking for, because we're looking at just breaking up space with line and curves. So I highly suggest that you don't go and put images in there. Over here, they put a name. The name is distracting. So don't put the name in it, and try not to do icons, things like that. Just use your tools and just create a design. Okay, another thing that's distracting is you'll notice here on this one, they actually took one of these templates and they laid it on their paper and they just drew around it. Well, that is what I call the easy way out, because you're not really thinking about how can I utilize different curves or shapes of this object. You're just taking the easy way out and just laying it down and tracing it. And you're not really thinking about design. So push yourself a little harder than just tracing around the whole thing. Like, how could I use just part of it and rotate and maybe do another part of it? How do I place that in my circle? So think a little bit further than just the obvious of tracing it. All right, but you'll notice all of these have some great ideas. This one is really nice, the color wheel here, but notice there's diamonds of color. All right, like I said, you can zoom in on your Chromebook to see this a little closer. But see how they added this space? They put tiny little diamonds above it to make those look like they're hanging down. Kind of like this one here. These have little arrows and these have little dots. So it was a way to break up the white space in the background. You'll also notice that, let me see if I can come in closer here like this. Can you see those little specks? That is a Sharpie, and they came back in with the Sharpie at the end and added the little specks to enhance the design. Those are actually on each one of those. You look on your Chromebook on your screen and zoom in, you'll see it. And that adds value as well, and interest. So like on this yellow one, they're even closer together that made that look darker as that goes behind that object. You'll also see where this object pattern overlaps. There's lines for part of it's open, and then part of it has the cross lines on it. So all of that breaks up those spaces and makes them all special and unique. Okay? So if you go through this list, this is what we're looking for. Each one of these things is what we're looking for in this design. So we went through here, value, like the dots, that adds value, thick and thin lines, dash lines, dot lines. You'll notice thick line here, thin line there. It all creates a variation, a difference for impact. Use of space. Does your design have movement, or is it all congested? Is it all just stuck in one area? How does it keep the eye flowing and looking through that whole design? And the use of positive and negative space. So positive space is the space contained by the object. Negative space is the space in and around the object. Did you utilize both of those? And do you have a size variation? Well, on this one, size variation, you'll notice this shape here, and this one's smaller. And then they have this shape here, and this one's a little smaller. So kind of go through there. Even this one is that same shape, just a little bigger. And look at some of these others. You see like this little curved shape there. Looks like a fin on a fish or a dragon or something. Anyway, it changes. It's smaller and gets bigger. So how can you change yours up? I think there's some more on this side. Let's look at these. This one, once again, the whole thing is painted without the background, but it works because they did gradations in here. So this is lighter in this open area and it fades to darker. Or it's lighter here and it goes darker to one color, goes darker to another color over here, lighter here, and the yellow orange out to the edges, the red orange. So that works because it's not painted flat color. Okay, over here they have negative space around all this, but it could have been more interesting had they done some kind of pattern work on that white space or somehow connected these arrows of their color wheel. Could have been even stronger if they had done that. You can see the line variation. So you'll see thick, you'll see thin, you'll see graded lines there. There's some more lines over here. But they could have come in and maybe did some cross lines somewhere. The other things to consider when you create your design. Okay? So today we're going to create an abstract design just using different templates to draw around and create some kind of way to break up the space. I have to remember my criteria, which we talked about in the other video. It must include all of these things. So I'm going to go through here, and I have templates like this. I have little ones. There's also these that have circles and other shapes. I also have French curves. So there's an assortment of French curves I could select from. All sizes, all shapes. I also have these cardboard cutouts that I can use. Okay. Once I talked about in the other video was the fact that I don't want you to take an object and just draw around the whole thing. Okay, that's kind of the easy way out, and it doesn't make for good design, and I really want you to be successful on this. So if you really liked something like this, think about what part of it do you really like. Is it just this curve part? Can you just use that curve and maybe bring it out a little bit further each time, or bring it in and it's a little shorter each time? Think about those things. Same with these. Okay, so I have 3 different sizes here. They're pretty interesting, but maybe I don't need to do the whole thing. Maybe I can have it come off the side and I only do part of it. And then I can slide it and do another part of it where it's kind of behind each other. All right, so we're just going to start going through and using some things. So let's see what I can come up with. Let's start with the basics first. Okay, I think I'll just start with this curve and just start breaking up space. If I don't like it, I can always change it. But we'll just I'm changing the size as those go. I'm rotating it. Okay, odd numbers are always nice. So I could do 3, or I could come in and maybe I can overlap and kind of rotate it. Maybe I put one smaller inside this one and maybe a smaller one behind that. Okay, so there's 3, there's 5. I also have to remember I need to have the color wheel in here. So I need to decide how do I want to do that color wheel. And I looked at some of these and there's some things that I like about it. Okay, this is one I had done in the past for a sample, and I really kind of like that idea. I like what this student had done over here too, with the diamonds. There's some other options here. This one made it really small. This one goes up one side. This one went all the way around. This one didn't show up very well. So I think I like the negative space behind this, so my color wheel shows up. So I'm going to do something similar to that. You can see one here started too. Probably another sample I started one year. That all those shapes, just the black and white sample. So I have curves here. I think I'll do these ellipses or ovals. Maybe this one and this one. So I think what I'll do is I'll do the primary and secondary colors larger. So I'll make them larger. So hopefully you're thinking to yourself, how many would that be? Right? Are you figuring that out yet? Primary, red, yellow, and blue. Secondary is green, orange, and violet. So if you're counting, that would be 6. Okay? So there's those 6. So then they could go in order. Now, what I want to do is I want to do my intermediate colors. So maybe I can do these where they're behind them, hanging down. Let's see. So I can start with one over here. I think I'll have them overlap. So see, as you can see, you just kind of make these decisions as you go. And so I'm going to draw where those are actually behind each one. See if that makes it a little more interesting. So I'm choosing to do the intermediate colors. So let's say we're starting with yellow. Okay, we start with yellow. So my yellow, green, probably here to continue. Anyway, so yellow, yellow, orange, orange, red, orange, red, red, violet, violet, blue, violet, blue, blue, green, green. And then once again, it picks back over here to my yellow, green. So like I said, you don't have to do that if you don't want to, but I am choosing to do the intermediates. And then keep in mind, I think what I'll do when I come back in here and do my marker, I think I'll do maybe some arrow shapes, at least for the primary and secondary. Oops. So it has emphasis on which ones are those key colors. So if I could do a pattern like that on each of those, and so exactly if I do that here, then I'll want to go in and erase where that overlaps that circle. So that will tell me not to paint in those areas because I've planned that this is what I'm going to do with my marker at the end. Now I suggest you do the marker at the end after you've done the watercolor, because sometimes if you do the marker first and then you paint in, then it smears. The marker will bleed into your colors and not be as clean. So I'll go back in and I'll straighten those up. But I still have all this gap and this big space right here. So let me see. What else do I have? I have these curves. So let's look at these curves. Maybe I probably need some straight edges too, because everything is very large and curved. How about if I use something like this? So I think I'm not going to draw the whole thing. It's going to be right behind that. So I'm going to do part of this shape. Okay, now you can see that's there. I'm going to come over and I'll leave that one. Maybe I'm going to come over here and make a bigger one. So I'm not doing the whole thing. I'm going to let it go off my paper. Okay, so there's two. We talked about thirds. So I could have maybe part of one hidden back here. So I just draw the lines that's in the background. Oops, I missed one. So right here, maybe behind this too. That's better. So I just got to keep track when I paint that I have this other little one right here that would go that. So I can think about, my color variation, like which things I'm going to gradiate, light to dark, which things I'm going to show different values of. How do I want to do that? So I can decide how I want to break that space up with some of those things. So now maybe I'm going to add a few of these. So this guy, let's just do the center of this one. Okay. So I'll do another one here. And I could do another one the same way. What happens if I flip it? Do I want to flip that? Let's flip it. See what that does. Make it go the other direction. Okay. Not bad. I can change those things up and use my stippling. I can do thicker on this side, maybe thin on this side. I could also do some decorative dots on the edges of those. So yeah, I can break up the space that way. I also have some things on the edges. So everything is very rounded. So maybe I want to do something that's a little more sharp edged, a little more pointed. So I'm going to play with these guys and see what this looks like. So all right, kind of like that. So I'm going to do some more. And let's do it again. Another one right here. Interesting. Kind of goes up the side. Guess what? I'm going to put a little bit down here. So let's see what it looks like if I make it look like it's in the background. I think I want it in the foreground, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to trace over that. And then I'll erase that line. And then of course I'm going to trace over this one. And now that allows me to have this little guy in the foreground. And so he's a little distance from those three, but that's okay. So it's like 3 and then 1. But I think over here, I'm going to put another one over here and break up this space on this side. So it'll connect and have some uniformity that way. I will also put it in the foreground and erase that piece. Okay, so this kind of gives me a start of how I broke up my space. Keep in mind, I'll also do those triangles here. I'll come back and clean that up before I start painting on it. And it kind of gives you an idea. So take your basic circle, take other shapes and stuff that you have around or templates, and please don't draw around the whole thing, because you can see the difference of how much more interesting it is when you just use partial parts of templates instead of the whole thing. So have fun, be creative. Okay, so the last video we showed was talking about how to divide our space up and draw it in using different shapes, different sizes in pencil. So I've gone in and I've painted my different sections, and let's go back and let's look at the criteria to make sure that I'm meeting the criteria before I move forward. The first thing it says here on the slide presentation is that we must show the color wheel, the primary and secondary. So that means primary is yellow, red, blue, secondary, orange, violet, green. I also included the intermediate colors, yellow, green, yellow, orange, red, violet, and a blue, green. So that's not required, but the other 6 are required. Okay, so that's up to you if you want to use those. Values of color as a gradation. So if we look, we can see that I used a variety of places. So there's a teal color here. So it goes from a light to medium to dark. There's shades of red here that changes, or there's shades of green. So I could count any of those as values of color gradation. Also, I could show monochromatic color scheme, which would be any of those greens or those teals. That would work as well. So I have the first 3. The next is value with the use of line, thick, thin, dash, dotted. Okay, that's what I'm going to go in and work on with the Sharpie. So I have a variety of Sharpies. I have super ultra thin, a regular, and a thick tip. So I'm going to use a variety of these. And I'm not just going to outline all my things. I'm going to go in and add some other details to it to kind of break up the space. And if you look at the examples here, it might give you some ideas of some things to do. But particularly this one over here in the black and white that's on your slide, you can look at that and note they didn't just outline. They did thick and thin lines. Thick towards the top, thin on the underside. They also did some stripes for some sections to break up some of that space. If you look over here on this one, it also has some stripes in part of it on top of the color, and then it's been cross-hatched on this side, or these little dots, or these little connecting lines. If you look really, really close, you'll see that there's pin dots. The dots closer together will make it darker. The dots further apart will make it look lighter. And you'll see that on some of these too. Also, you can see it right here on this yellow one. So I'm going to work on mine a little bit, and then I'll come back and I'll show you what I've got, because I want to make sure that I can meet that criteria. I also want to add pattern, which that's what some of that is. My use of space and design, we did that when we did it in pencil. positive, negative space. You can incorporate other things like this that I talked about, those stripes in the background to break up the space. And then size variation, which I use different oval sizes here. I changed up the sizes down here. So that would count for that. All right, so I'll be back in a little bit and we'll see what progress I've made. Okay, as you can see, I went ahead and outlined everything, and I used just the regular Sharpie at first, and you can see I did that on all of these down here, and they're all the same. So it's kind of boring, so I need to change that up. What I did here is I went ahead and used the regular Sharpie for this top part on each of these, you can tell, and then I used the ultra thin and on the underneath side. I'm up here on this. So my primary and secondary, I used the regular Sharpie, and then I used the thin one on the intermediate colors. Okay, and I free drew them. I did not. You can tell they're kind of crooked. It's a little more natural that way. It does not have to. You don't have to use the templates to try to do it. Like when you drew, because a lot of times what happens is the Sharpie might bleed underneath it, or the template moves and then it smears. So just free draw it. It's perfectly fine. It'll look good. So let's go in and let's look at some of these shapes and think about how can I change those up to make them more interesting. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is, I think I'm on these to separate them on the curves. I'm going to make them thicker on one side than the other. Okay, so I think I'm going to come in and I'm going to be consistent. So I'm going to make that a lot thicker. On the underneath. Notice now that actually has emphasis by doing that and a little more form to it than these that did not. So I'm going to continue and do that on all of those. And try to be consistent that I do it on the same side. It is a little intimidating to do things in Sharpie because it doesn't erase, but just go with it. If you make a mistake, turn it into something that looks like maybe it was planned. Okay, so see how much more dramatic those are than what they were? I still have a couple more here, so I'm going to go ahead and do those. And there's one more here. So then this will meet my criteria that was on my list here that said I needed to use thick and thin lines. So that obviously I have been. I think I'm going to go in and do that on some of these items as well. And I might go ahead and do some of these other ovals just to separate them. So I might make this back one. Let's say I make this one super thick. And you know what? We're going to cut this out so you don't have to worry about that outside edge as much. So I have super thick. So then I'll make this one a little thicker. And then I have this one. Okay, so that shows a little separation there. Maybe I'll just go over this part on this side. It's a little bit thinner. So it's not as thick. It's a little darker there. Oh, see, that made that a little more dramatic too. So I think I'm going to do a thick one on this front one and change it up like that. And do that on this too. So I just did one side versus the other. It kind of looks like a cast shadow that way. Kind of created some depth. So another thing I can do is come in and I can do some stipple dots. So let's say I can make this a darker value, but I could come in and I could spread out some dots on here. Okay, I think you can kind of see those. I didn't make them big or bold. And then I'll just do a few on this one. Spread them out a little bit more. So that adds like an interesting texture to those. And then on this one, I'll just do a few little round ones, even spread out a little bit more. So now that added some variation to that and made that a little more interesting as well. Okay, I think I'm going to go in and work on this a little bit more, and I'll pause the video and I'll come back and show you what I did at the end. So here you'll notice that I've gone back in and I've added more thick and thin lines. I've added more dot texture to some things. I also came in and put some solid dots here to kind of break those shapes up. I also added a little thickness here by adding an extra line and some little hash lines there. And then in the background on the blue, it was a little too flat, so I wanted to make it more interesting. So I came in and I drew stripes that only landed on that dark blue part, and so that pushed the background further away from all these objects in the foreground. And then when I looked at it, I decided there was too much white space. So I came back in and I started just adding some black and white shapes and some patterns and textures to kind of break that up. So that's where I'm at with this. It's in pretty good shape. There's things I messed up on, but that happens. I just try to turn it into part of the design. So you can do the same thing. The next step is to cut the circle out, and then we'll mount it on black paper, and you can see how we've done that in these images right here. So, and then you'll be done. So good luck, have fun, really think outside the box about patterns, textures, shapes, thick and thin lines, and use your color. Can't wait to see what you do.
Thanks for joining me for another great workshop today.